All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into a really fascinating but often misunderstood chapter of American history, the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks still have this image of them, like violent and militant and anti-white.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah,
a lot of that is
largely a product of, how they've been portrayed, I think.
exactly. And it's really unfortunate because that misrepresentation has been so powerful and persistent
Right.
for decades now.
Hmm.
How many times have you seen the Black Panthers actually portrayed accurately
Yeah.
in a movie or a TV show? I mean,
It's pretty rare.
rare.
And that's why I think this deep dive is so important, because we really want to get beyond those kind of, surface level understandings of who they were
Exactly.
and really unpack the myths and explore, who they really were, what they actually believed, and why they were so feared by, the establishment. We've got this great Throughline episode from NPR to kind of guide us.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to see what we uncover.
I think what's so fascinating about the Black Panthers is that their story begins in a place and time many of you might remember.
Oh, wait.
Oakland, California in 1965.
Yeah.
The Watts Rebellion had just shaken the nation and, really exposed all of the raw anger and frustration simmering beneath the surface of, American society.
Yeah, you have these two college students, right? Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And they're right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Witnessing firsthand the brutal realities of police brutality and, just racial discrimination across the board.
And they weren't just witnessing it, they were actively organizing against these injustices.
Right.
And, they saw that there was a void in the civil rights movement, a need for, a much more radical and confrontational approach.
Yeah, and this is where, the influence of Malcolm X becomes really crucial, even though he was assassinated, before the party even formed.
Yeah, his call for Black self-determination.
Right.
His rejection of integration in favor of, Black empowerment deeply resonated with Newton and Seale.
Right.
They saw themselves as carrying on his legacy.
Yeah.
But with a really unique blend of Black nationalism and Marxist ideals.
Now, when you hear Marxist ideals, I think a lot of people kind of, immediately think of Soviet Russia or communist revolution.
Right.
But for the Panthers, it was really about analyzing the power structures within American society and understanding how capitalism itself was contributing to the oppression of Black communities.
Right. They were looking at things through a very economic lens and seeing that the exploitation of Black labor was a key part of the problem. And that's where their famous 10-point program comes in. It wasn't just about Black empowerment. It was really a comprehensive political platform.
Right.
Demanding things like full employment, decent housing, and an end to capitalist exploitation.
It is amazing how broad their platform actually was.
It was.
They called for things that would benefit working class people of all races, not just, Black folks. Like, they wanted to dismantle the whole system that was perpetuating inequality.
Right, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions about the Black Panthers, that they were solely focused on Black liberation.
Right.
In reality, they actually saw themselves as part of a much larger global struggle against oppression.
Yeah.
They drew a lot of inspiration from the decolonization movements happening in Africa and Asia, and they recognized the interconnectedness of all of these struggles.
So they weren't just, thinking about domestic issues. They're really looking at this bigger picture, connecting the dots between American imperialism abroad and racial injustice at home.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where their staunch opposition to the Vietnam War comes in. They saw it as a direct manifestation of American imperialism.
Yeah.
A war fought to maintain global dominance at the expense of Black and brown lives, both in Vietnam and in the United States.
So you've got this group that is, really challenging the very foundations of American society. And they're doing it in a way that's intentionally provocative.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about their use of the word pig to describe the police.
Right.
Like, that wasn't just a random insult.
No.
It was a calculated strategy to delegitimize authority and to expose, the systemic brutality that they were facing.
Absolutely.
They understood the power of language to shape perception. And they weren't afraid to use it in a way that would shock and disrupt.
Yeah. So they're playing this very strategic game, knowing how their rhetoric is going to be perceived, and they're using it to their advantage.
Right.
But of course, this plays right into the hands of, those who want to paint them as a dangerous threat.
But to really understand their impact, I think we need to look beyond just the headlines.
Yeah.
And delve into their community organizing efforts. Their survival pending revolution programs.
Right. This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because, on the surface, these programs seem totally benign, right?
Right.
Free breakfast programs for kids, health clinics, liberation schools.
Yeah.
But that's exactly why the FBI saw them as such a threat.
So providing for the basic needs of their community was seen as a threat.
Absolutely, because the FBI understood that when people start to see the possibility of a better world, when they start to build those structures themselves, it really undermines the legitimacy of existing power structures.
So it wasn't just about the Panthers' ideology or their rhetoric.
No.
It was their ability to create self-sufficient institutions that truly terrified the establishment.
Exactly. They were demonstrating the power of collective action and the potential for communities to take care of their own without having to rely on the state.
Yeah.
Which is a very powerful thing.
Very powerful.
And very dangerous in the eyes of, the powers that be.
Right, and that's what we're going to kind of dig into next time.
Exactly.
When we continue our deep dive.
Yeah, we'll see how the FBI really cracked down on them.
Yeah.
Using all sorts of insidious tactics.
It's a wild story.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See ya. And it wasn't just, limited to Black communities.
Right.
The Panthers actually actively sought to build alliances with other marginalized groups, forming what they called the Rainbow Coalition.
Yeah, I've heard that term, the Rainbow Coalition, but honestly, I don't know much about it.
Yeah.
Beyond just the name. It sounds almost too idealistic to be true.
It was a remarkable experiment in cross-racial and cross-cultural solidarity.
Wow.
They worked with groups like the Chinese American Red Guards, the Chicano Brown Berets, even white Appalachian Young Patriots. They recognized that the systems of oppression that they were fighting against were interconnected, and that true liberation required a united front.
So they were way ahead of their time in terms of, intersectionality.
Yeah.
Like recognizing that all these different struggles were linked to, a common enemy, systemic injustice.
Absolutely.
But, building and maintaining such a diverse coalition, I imagine must have been incredibly challenging.
It was, there were ideological differences, cultural clashes, constant struggle to balance the needs and priorities of each group.
Yeah.
But, despite all of those challenges, they did manage to achieve some pretty significant victories.
Oh, wow.
For example, they organized joint protests against police brutality and advocated for policies that would benefit all working class people.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It really challenges the narrative that they were just a Black power group. But of course, a movement this radical couldn't go unchallenged for long.
Right.
And as I understand it, the FBI's COINTELPRO program was specifically designed to disrupt and dismantle groups like the Black Panthers.
COINTELPRO was incredibly insidious. It went way beyond just surveillance. They engaged in just this widespread campaign of disinformation, psychological warfare, and even outright violence to neutralize the Panthers.
Wow.
They infiltrated the group. They spread rumors to sow discord among members. They even instigated violent confrontations between the Panthers and rival groups.
It's just chilling to think about the extent to which the government went to suppress dissent, you know?
Yeah.
But COINTELPRO wasn't just about disrupting the movement as a whole, right? They were really focused on taking down key leaders, like Fred Hampton in Chicago.
Yeah, Hampton was a rising star in the party. Very charismatic, articulate, and incredibly effective at building bridges between different communities.
Right.
He was really the embodiment of the Rainbow Coalition's potential.
Yeah.
And the FBI saw him as a major threat.
And his assassination during that FBI raid in 1969 is, one of the most tragic and well-documented examples of COINTELPRO's brutality.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to fathom that something like that could happen in America.
What's even more disturbing is that the FBI went to extraordinary lengths to cover up their involvement in Hampton's death.
Right.
It took years of investigation and legal battles to expose the truth, that the raid was carefully planned,
Wow.
that Hampton was drugged beforehand,
Jeez.
and that the police fired nearly 100 shots into his apartment while he lay asleep in bed.
It's a stark reminder that the fight for justice often comes at a great cost.
It does.
Hampton's death was a devastating blow to the Black Panther Party.
Mm-hmm.
And, the COINTELPRO program, along with the broader crackdown on black activists, ultimately decimated the movement.
Yeah, it's important to understand the context here.
Yeah.
The late 1960s and early 1970s were a time of just intense social upheaval and political repression.
Right.
The FBI wasn't just targeting the Panthers.
Right.
They were going after anyone who challenged the status quo.
Yeah.
From anti-war activists to civil rights leaders.
So the Panthers weren't just, victims of their own internal conflicts or strategic errors.
Right.
They were also facing an incredibly powerful and a determined adversary. In the form of the U.S. government.
Exactly. And the legacy of that repression is still felt today.
Mm-hmm.
The criminalization of black communities, the mass incarceration that we see.
Yeah.
These are all rooted in the policies and practices that were developed during this period to suppress movements like the Black Panthers.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought. But,
Yeah.
Even though the Black Panther Party was ultimately dismantled, their legacy continues to inspire activists and movements today.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the, the most enduring aspects of their legacy?
I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of community empowerment. The Panthers understood that true liberation couldn't come solely from, top-down political change.
Right.
It required building strong, self-sufficient communities that could provide for their own needs and challenge these systems of oppression from the ground up.
Yeah, there's survival programs, like the free breakfast program for children.
Right.
They were incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
And they weren't just meeting like immediate needs. They were demonstrating a different way of, organizing society.
Exactly.
One that was based on mutual aid and solidarity.
And you can see those programs resonating today.
Yeah.
In the rise of community gardens, mutual aid networks, all these grassroots initiatives that are addressing systemic issues in a very direct and tangible way.
It's like they planted seeds that are still bearing fruit decades later.
Absolutely.
Another thing that strikes me is their emphasis on political education. They didn't just want to mobilize people.
Right.
They wanted to raise their consciousness.
Yeah.
Help them understand the root causes of their oppression. Empower them to actually fight for change.
Absolutely. They saw education as a tool for liberation.
Right.
And they created, their own schools, libraries, and study groups to educate their communities. And that commitment to political education is something that we see in a lot of contemporary movements as well.
Yeah.
This real emphasis on understanding systemic issues, unpacking privilege, and developing a critical analysis of power.
Yeah, it's about empowering people to think for themselves.
Right.
Question those dominant narratives and envision a different kind of future.
Absolutely.
But, I think it's also important to acknowledge the Panthers' flaws, right? They weren't perfect.
No.
And some of their tactics and rhetoric were definitely controversial.
Yeah, they were a product of their time.
Right.
And some of their actions, particularly their embrace of armed self-defense, alienated potential allies and gave their enemies, ammunition to discredit them. But I think it's crucial to view their choices within the historical context of the brutal repression that they faced. They were fighting for their survival in a system that was actively trying to destroy them.
So while we might not agree with all of their tactics, we can understand the desperation and anger that fueled them.
Right.
And I think it's also important to remember that their message of resistance resonated deeply with so many people.
It did.
Who felt marginalized and unheard.
Absolutely. The Panthers weren't just a political party. They were a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
Their iconic imagery, their defiant rhetoric, their unwavering commitment to social justice inspired a generation of activists and artists.
And their influence continues to be felt today in everything from, hip-hop music to contemporary art to the Black Lives Matter movement.
Absolutely.
It's a testament to the enduring power of their vision.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What lessons can we draw from the Black Panthers story as we kind of navigate the challenges of our own time?
I think one of the most important lessons is the need for solidarity and coalition building. The Panthers understood that no single group can achieve liberation on its own.
Right.
They recognized that these struggles are all interconnected, and they sought to build bridges across racial, ethnic, and class divides.
And that's a lesson that's more relevant than ever today, I think.
I agree.
We're facing this convergence of crises, climate change, economic inequality, racial injustice, the erosion of democracy. Like, we need to come together, build these powerful movements that can actually challenge these systems of oppression, and create a more just and sustainable world.
Absolutely.
Another key takeaway, I think, is the importance of challenging those dominant narratives. The Panthers were constantly battling against these misrepresentations and stereotypes that were used to demonize them. They understood the power of media and propaganda, and they actively sought to control their own narrative.
And we need to be mindful of that today as well. We're bombarded with information from all sides. It's easy to get caught up in the spin and misinformation. We need to be critical thinkers. Question the sources that we rely on. And amplify the voices of those who are often silenced or marginalized.
The Panthers' story is a reminder that, the fight for justice is an ongoing process.
It is.
There will be setbacks, there will be sacrifices, and there will be times when it feels like the forces of oppression are just too powerful to overcome. But, we can draw inspiration from the Panthers' courage, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world.
I think that's a really important point.
Their legacy is a call to action. It's a challenge to each of us to stand up for what we believe in, fight for the rights of all people, and to never give up hope for a more just and equitable future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the history and legacy of the Black Panther Party. It's been a really eye-opening conversation.
It has.
And I hope you've gained some new insights and perspectives.
Well, I know I have.
History is not just something that we read about in textbooks. It's alive. It's dynamic. And it's constantly shaping the world that we live in.
Absolutely.
So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.
That's what it's all about.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See ya.